We're really lucky today to have a renowned storyteller, author, and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. That's none other than Michael Meade. And I've been a huge fan of his for many, many years. And I don't know how we did this. We pulled a rabbit out of the hat to get him on the program because he's so in demand and so of great interest to so many people. And we're going to talk to him today about the past and the present and a theme that he's been bringing up quite a bit. So, hey, Michael, welcome to Earth Ancients. Great to have you on the program.
Great to be with you, Cliff.
Yeah. You have been presenting a series on YouTube on calling, and I have found it so important because of our current situation here in the United States specifically. People are depressed, they feel lost, they feel disenfranchised. And I want you to explain to us what calling means. And if you can you talk about how our ancestors received and acknowledged the calling?
Yeah, I'll try. So it actually begins with a kind of decision about the nature of the human soul. And there's typically two big theories. There's lots of smaller theories, but the two big options are that a person comes into the world with an empty soul. And the Latin for that was tabula rasa, the scrape clean table. There's nothing in there. And then your parents write on you, and your neighborhood writes on you, and your teachers write on you, and your cultures write on you, and you become the aggregation of those things that have impressed you or been impressed upon you. That's the one theory. That's not a very ancient theory, actually, but it's a very popular theory. The ancient theory, to bring the past into it, found in almost all cultures around the world, is that each person comes into the world already gifted and already aimed. And so that's the idea of the not pre-shaped, but pre-scripted soul, not in the sense that it's predetermined and it has to go a certain way, but it's more like a living plot line. And so the components of that gifted soul, not the empty soul now, but the gifted soul, are components. One of them, I call it the genius. Genius is an old Latin term that doesn't mean high IQ or specific talent. It means the spirit that's already there. That's the definition of genius. Each person comes into the world with the genius quality or genius spirit in their soul that is at the core of their heart and at the core of their being. And then what happens, because we are born into the realm of time and space, we forget this thing that is coming in with us, so we don't know about it. Our families don't know about it. The family doesn't know the gifts or the aims or the destiny of their own children. It's set up that way because eventually the children will leave home because there's a missing thing they cannot find it at home. They have to enter the world in order to awaken this thing that turns out to be inside. Calling is when the person goes out into the world and has an experience of awakening, and which is called the calling. It calls a person into a greater sense of self, into a greater sense of meaning, into a direction that's meaningful. But that calling is calling to the genius that's already in there. I think that's essential to understanding it. The calling may seem to come from the outside, but it's calling to qualities that already exist in a person. And that's why it's so meaningful and so profound.
Mm.
So this is one of the oldest ideas. And so if we begin with the notion that each person, each soul born is unique, each person is unique, that means they're going to have a unique blend of talents and capacities, gifts, and aims. And the calling is trying to awaken that. When a person responds to the calling, they are bringing something to the world that isn't already in the world. Their unique creative capacity, their unique genius qualities, and things that make not just them meaningful, but that are gifts given to the human community, and it makes everybody more meaningful. And so I'm not sure you asked the thing about how ancient cultures would have seen the calling. What I'm talking about when I say genius is the spirit that we're born with, that's from the pre-Roman culture. So, and then you can find that there's a beautiful story from the Mayan culture about a boy is born and he's given the name Poder, which in its old translation means gifted, it means purposeful, it means talented, it means destined. In other words, he represents all children born that have those qualities in them. And then what happens, a person has to wander into the world and in a sense, encounter circumstances that awaken these qualities from within. That awakening is responding to the call.
And are there writings that you define as subject matter calling in perhaps Greek or you mentioned Maya? I think of the Maya text, the Popol Vuh, which describes the twins, but perhaps has some fragments of calling in it.
Okay, Popol Vuh is a good example. It's a very unusual book, very mysterious book, but it has in it a creation story where they have the multiple gods, like a lot of ancient cultures did. Modern people think they didn't have the notion of the singular God, but that's a complete misunderstanding. They
Hmm.
had a diversity of gods that were secretly one deity. That's the real old idea. But anyway, the Mayan gods, like one of them is Heart of Heaven, Heart of Earth. Those are the names they have. They create the world, what we call the world, and particularly the earthly world of mountains and rivers and streams and forests and all that kind of stuff. And then when it's finished, they feel like there's something missing. And it's Heart of Heaven who starts to try to figure out what's missing. And he comes to the conclusion that what's missing is two things: a being that is conscious of being part of creation, and also a being that is grateful for the gift of life. And so then he begins to try to create that kind of being. He makes three tries at it. The first try, he tries to make it out of mud, and then a heavy rain comes and the beings melt. The second one, they make it out of sticks, and then what happens is those sticks become very rigid and they're hard-hearted
Right.
and hard-headed, and they keep creating technologies that are offensive to the animals and the plants. And so finally, Heart of Heaven has to bring a heavy rain down to demolish those sticks. And the third try, they try to make it out of corn. And of course, corn is the sacred element in Mayan cosmology. And so it's then those corn people who wind up having this realization that they have a gift of life, that they are gifted, that life is a gift that exists in them, and the implication is uniquely, but also that has the realization that that creation itself is meaningful. And so then the idea is we have all descended from them. So that part of the story, to me, it's connected to the Mayan tale I was telling, where the boy is considered to be gifted, Poder. He's the gifted one, but he's really everyone. And so I think it does show up in the Popol Vuh, which is a wild, magical mythology, but it
Yeah.
shows up in the creation part of the Popol Vuh. And so creation stories, which exist all over the world, and most cultures have more than one creation story. Even the Bible has two creation stories in it, as if to say there cannot be one story of creation. That creation is itself an expression of diversity and multiplicity that requires more than one story. And so there's a way in which understanding human life requires that we understand creation. And
Mhm.
because of this, if a person is gifted and aimed, let's say they're aimed at being a musician, or aimed at being a poet, or aimed at being a healer, or aimed at being an inventor, that's what is waiting to awaken in them. When it awakens, that person, each person that awakens that way, will bring something to the world that is not already in the world. In other words, we become co-creators, or we join the creative energy of the world. And of course, everyone until modern times understood that creation wasn't something that happened back there and we're in the afterglow of it. Creation is ongoing every day. The forest rises and falls all the time. The trees that were the tallest become the fallen down, breaking down elements from which the next forest comes. We've been living in that mystery of recreation all along, except modern people have separated from that for various reasons. And in that separation, modern people have found themselves separate from the creative energies that exist inside each person. All the people waiting for the next election to fix all that is broken now are going to be waiting for a long time.
Boy.
It's a matter of reimagining culture and recreating it. And if everybody is gifted and aimed, then no one has to be a hero and fix it all or pretend they're doing that, because it's going to be the awakening of the creative energies in the gifted people that are uniquely all around the world. That's what changes the world. Not a single idea, and certainly not a committee meeting. What changes the world, they used to say, change the soul, change the world. And
Mm.
what they mean is each soul has capacity to bring elements of change and recreation and beauty and healing to the world. And that's, I think, why the whole dynamic of calling is so important right now. We are, there's an old saying that in dark times, there's an acceleration of calling. When the structures are all breaking down, they're no longer in the way, and there's more calling kind of enters the world. We
Mm.
change this world by each of us responding as best we can to our own calling. And as near as I can tell, no one lacks a calling because no one lacks a soul.
But Michael, in the muck and the mire, in the despair that we feel, how do we recognize the calling?
So if this stuff was simple, it wouldn't have been so readily forgotten. It's a bit tricky. If the person is unique, then the calling can be unique. And so, but here's an old idea, or it's a kind of an old rule that by, say, 22 years of age, each person has a genuine experience of the core depth of their own soul, or else they die. It's an old idea. That is to say, everyone is gifted when they come into the world, and in many stories, everyone is aimed at a destiny, and everybody by birthright is going to have at least one experience of what that is inside them. That is this combination of genius qualities and calling that leads to a meaningful life. And so people always say, well, how do you know that? And of course, you have to go to personal experience in a way. I mean,
Right.
you can know what's in books, but you know it in your own body and soul when it happens to you. So when I was 13, it was my 13th birthday, my my mother asked me what I wanted for my birthday. And I had learned from sad experience not to say what I wanted because I wasn't going to get it. We were a poor family. And if I said what I wanted and I didn't get it, we were all that much more depressed for a while. So I just said, it doesn't matter. I don't want anything. But my aunt asked me what I was interested in. And at 13, I was interested in history. I was trying to understand what the hell happened here. And I was growing up in a poor neighborhood where everybody had lost their dreams and it was kind of like despairing in a way. And I wanted to understand it. And I thought from what I had heard, history could explain it, but actually it can't. So my aunt goes off to the bookstore to get me a history book. First person in my family to go to a bookstore as far as I know. And she's very short and she asks where the history books are and they point to an upper shelf and she goes and reaches up, gets a book, they wrap it. She gives it to me. I start to tear the paper off, and on the cover, there's like a young guy sitting on a flying horse shooting an arrow into the air, and I go, "Whoa!" This, and my aunt goes, "Oh, it's the wrong book. Give it back." And I'm going, "No, I want this book." We're in like tugging, and then I rip the rest of the paper off, and it says "Mythology" by Edith Hamilton. So, 13 years old, I am given the right, wrong book, which is the language that I'm intended to learn about and live with. I read the whole book that night, almost the entire book. And I literally in this, house in this New York City in a poor neighborhood, I'm going, this is it. This is it. I
Wow.
don't have to grow up to qualify. I don't have to be not a poor person to qualify. I don't have to go to school to qualify. I'm just finding this language in which I qualify to be part of the whole meaning of the world. That's
Yeah.
what happened to me. But my family naturally didn't know what are you talking about? What is that book? Your Rand is right. You should. And then I go to the teachers in school and tell them, and they say, "What? This makes no sense." So I have this knowledge now, this which is attuned to me, because I'm going to turn out to be a storyteller. And so the right wrong book just landed there at a time when I had enough self-awareness to realize, oh, this is totally meaningful to me. But it probably took me 20 years to realize what that meant in my life and also to get it confirmed by others. So here's the other thing. Everyone has a gift or a mixture of gifts and abilities, and everyone has a calling. But those gifts have to be confirmed by someone outside ourselves. It's just part of the understanding of human community. That all on ourselves, on our own, we won't trust ourselves. But if someone we respect says, yeah, you're pretty good at that. Like I had a friend who picked up a guitar and could play music. I mean, I never did figure out how he did it. It was like a gift. He could just play. But he didn't really own it because he was insecure about it. And then when he finally met an advanced guitar player who said to him, "You're pretty good," that was it. Then he knew that was his gift. So it's our gift, but it has to be confirmed by someone outside of ourselves. And that gives us the hint that what is gifted to us, which means that we are intended to give that gift, is also a gift for others. It's a gift for the community, not just for oneself.
Hmm.
And that's why I say, if we want to change the world, the more people that awaken to what their gifts naturally are and what their calling should be, that's how the world changes. Someone over here is figuring out how to purify streams and lakes, and someone over here is figuring out how to heal certain illnesses with natural means, and someone over here is figuring out how to negotiate conflicts that seem unresolvable. And when the more that's happening, the more people are responding to those callings that are aligned with their inner genius,
Hmm.
then all of a sudden it's starting to change from below. And then you get ready to change the structures and the political dynamics. So I think it comes down to, as the ancient people said, the individual psyche. And that's why I keep talking about calling so much.
It sounds like in the story of your 13-year-old discovery of this book on mythology is a wonderful representation. But it sounds like you're saying that when we incarnate, we are given signs and we're prepared in some way to receive the calling. Is that a good interpretation?
Yeah, that the world will collude with the personal life so that that which already exists within us gets awakened, provoked, and awakened. A lot of stuff happened to me when I was 13. 6 months after I got that book, I'm growing up in a kind of rough neighborhood. I'm in local gang. We called it a crew. And we were the younger crew. We were trying to imitate the older guys who were the hoods, and we're running around acting that out to one degree or another. And we used to go to this movie theater on Saturdays, but we didn't have any money, so we would sneak in. We had all kinds of ways to sneak into this theater. And one day we're in there, and I have to go up to the bathroom. It's upstairs, above where everybody's sitting. And I'm on my way up to the bathroom. I'm still 13. I'm 13 and a half now. And all of a sudden, there's two guys in front of me and two guys behind me and two guys on my side, and they're all bigger than me, and they're going with me, or really, I'm going with them now. We get to the bathroom, they throw me onto the floor next to a urinal, and now there's seven of them, and they're surrounding me, and they've got like knives, and a couple of them have sharpened monkey wrenches. And I realize who they are. They're this group called the Monkey Wrench Gang, and they're known for doing lots of harm, and they are going to hurt me. And it turns out that it's because this friend of mine who had lost his mind, kind of, he had some crazy reason started calling them names and everything, and they couldn't catch him, but they caught me.
Oh,
And so I'm there, looking, when people are going to do harm, they get like a stare in their eyes. And I didn't know it until then, but I saw it. And I realized I'm going to get really hurt. And looking at it psychologically now, I realize what happened is my ego departed. My ego just thought, I don't want to be around for this. And what happened is I started telling a story, laying there on the floor, thinking I'm about to die. Something in me, no rehearsal, no preparation, no plan, just starts telling a story. And as I do that, their eyes lose that glare, and literally their hands go down, and the weapons are now, hanging down. And then eventually the leader of the group says, "Well, all right, we're going to let you go, but you tell your friend never talk that way about us again." So now I not only have the language of myth, I now have become a storyteller in a life or death situation. And the same thing happens. I go right back to my gang, the guys, and say, I found something stronger than weapons. And I tell them, and they go, "Oh, we got to go get those guys." And I'm saying, you're missing the point. They didn't hurt me. And they didn't because I told them a story. There's something stronger than just attacking each other with the weapons. But everybody, they ignored me. And I had another piece of the story. but I did had to have that confirmed later too.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to say that everybody has this, not everybody has dramatic stories like that, but everybody has their story. And hidden inside a person's story are certain occasions when that's this inner quality awakened, but it usually doesn't get confirmed because the culture has forgotten about it.
Hmm.
So even though it's tricky and not easy, I say to people, go back over your life story, especially teenage years and adolescence, and look at anything that was surprising. Sometimes what happens is the young person realizes what their gift is, and they try to share it with the family that had different intentions for them. They didn't want a musician, or they didn't, they wanted a doctor or whatever it is. And so it becomes latent, it gets repressed. But you can go back and find these moments. And so that's that's what I did. I went back and I found those moments and realized, and when you find them, they keep getting bigger. In other words, I go back to that story of being about to be, I think, really harmed or killed by really rough guys with weapons. And then it explains to me why, how many years later was it? I don't even know how many years later. I was about maybe 30 years old when the first book I wrote, The Water of Life, they paid me some money for it. It was like a total surprise. And I had this, because I'd never written before. And they paid me a lot of money actually. And so then I had this money. What am I going to do? And I decided to start a nonprofit to work with violent youth.
Oh,
So yeah, so I, for decades, have worked with gangs and street kids and prisoners and people who wind up getting caught up in violence because I have some understanding of it, but also because I had that awakening in that kind of circumstance.
yeah.
So I'm trying to suggest that when we find these places where our own gifts become revealed and we have moments of awakening, they can keep expanding. I understand more about that experience now than I did then. It's gotten bigger inside of me. It actually gives me courage. I can go into a situation that's not clear and there's fear and everything, and I can draw on that because it's something that happened to me. It's not an abstract quality, it's actually a lived experience.
What about the individuals who are working in the 9 to 5 existence who have no awareness for the calling? Is it subtle hints? Is it events that are shown to them that they need to wake up and consider another vocation? How do we work with that?
Well, one thing, and I like old sayings, and one of them is sometimes the obstacle is in the way, and sometimes the obstacle is the way. In other words, a person's working hard day and night, like I was doing that as a young father and a husband with 4 children. And then because people say to me, well, even if you have an idea what it is, how do you find the time? You can't make money at it, and you have to. And so I was a young father with 4 kids. I had to make money, and since I knew that part of my calling involved language and ideas and stories, and I would get up an hour and a half or 2 hours before the kids. And then anyone who has had kids know that as they get older, going to school, they get up earlier. So I was getting up earlier and earlier because I needed an hour and a half, better 2 hours if I could get it, before everybody was up. If I could do that 3 days in a row, I'd be okay. I was nourishing and feeding my psyche. I was feeding my imagination while I was also feeding the family. And so I was told you have to pick one or the other. Either you're going to be, you know, you're going to work and be productive, or you're going to be some creative person who, scrambles for existence your whole life. No,
Right.
you can combine the two. And once you get a feeling for it, you know that you have to nourish it. And even that 1.5 hours early in the morning was enough nourishment to keep me going. And then eventually you just bump into things. You bump into things. Like things are all interconnected. And so there were occasions I had started telling stories, but I was just some weird guy telling stories. And then I just made a certain connection, and something I said at a given point caused some other people to go, that was really insightful. Where did that come from? And why don't you come and teach this stuff that you're working on at this conference? And the next thing I was working at conferences, and pretty soon I quit the 9 to 5 job and I became an itinerant storyteller.
Amazing. That brings up another topic, which is genius. And I think you talk as though we all have this genius capacity in
Yeah.
us, which I find just radical because I think some people may not recognize their own genius and just kind of go through the sludge. But talk about genius for a minute, and it's
Yeah.
important.
So it's this idea that there is a spirit inside us that has gifts and qualities that are already existing in us. Like at 13 and a half, I can come up something in me. I'm vacating, I'm fleeing the situation, but something in me can come up with a story that compels these guys with the weapons to just forget about the idea of hurting me. That's a genius thing to do.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's not like a genius, me, I'm a genius. It's a quality in the person. And so then it's a mixture of gifts, talents, and abilities, but also style. So I become a storyteller, and people always say, well, what's the key to storytelling? The key to storytelling is style. If a person learns their own style, they're totally convincing. If a person learns all the tricks that you use on stage and all, they may not be convincing at all. The style, the word style is not superficial. It means something inscribed on the soul. And so there's a style inside a person that's part of the genius. For instance, if you love like a piano music, which is so profound, and there's so many great pianists, but the really great ones, you hear a few bars and you know who that is because their genius is coming through. Yes, they're great piano players, but their unique way of playing that sonata is what you feel. And so it's a unique mixture of things that gives a person gifts that they can give. In giving the gift, the genius gifts, in giving them, it doesn't diminish the gifts, it increases them. So, but I want to say something else about it because this isn't all pure light and all the doors open and everything's cool. Be-
Right.
Because the word talent it comes from a German word that means the weight used to measure gold. The weight they put on the scales to measure the amount of gold. So genius is also called the golden qualities in a person, like the guy who can play the guitar as soon as he picks it up, or the person who has a naturally good voice, or the person who has an instinctive but also uniquely qualified way of connecting to animals. That's a genius thing. And should they become a vet? Yeah, probably, but it's even more genius than that
Mm.
because they're connecting to the spirit of animals and so on and so forth. And of course, ancient cultures really revered that kind of connection. But the word talent is a weight. So that means, for instance, if a person has genuine talents and they're not conscious of them or practicing using them or learning how to express them, then what could have been a golden thing that lit up the room and lit up their own psyche becomes a weight on their soul. For some people, the reason they are depressed is because they're not expressing their own genius. So the world is very rarely neutral. So we're either growing our soul and becoming a better version of ourselves, or we're shrinking from life. That's the way it goes.
Yeah, and that's just thinking right now that a lot of people are so depressed that they are shrinking
Yes.
and they're unable to get out of the muck. And is it that the soul works to get this person out and reveal the calling, or how do they move
Well,
forward?
well, the old ideas are that the soul is here to transform. So I had mentioned spirit. Genius is like the spirit, but genius lives in the soul. So genius and soul are not the same thing. In cosmology, spirit and soul, genius is a spirit. You can call it either genius or spirit. Spirit is connected to fire and air and it wants to rise up. And soul is connected to water and earth and it wants to descend. And so a person's psyche is a mixture of spirit with its ascensional, aspirational qualities, and soul with its intrigue with going deeper and getting more connected to the earth, to the animals, to nature, to other people. And
Mm.
so the way out is both spirit and soul. Sometimes a person is stuck and they can't, they're feeling the weight of the world. The weight of the world is coming down on everyone now. No, people traditionally have not felt the weight of the world the way we are feeling it for a number of reasons. First of all, nature is rattling at the same time culture is unraveling. And so we're in this thing where nature is in trouble just as human nature is in trouble. That's a heavy thing.
Mm.
Typically, you could think of nature as balanced and so on, but nature's lost some of its balance, partially because of humans losing their balance. But now, because of mass communication, we know what's going on. Young people are growing up into the knowledge that nature is in trouble and that culture is what do you call that? Divided and polarized. They're growing up into that atmosphere. And that's why it's so important that calling and genius be kind of become better known. So a young person goes, well, I'm not going to find a career that for my whole lifetime. You can't do that anymore. Things change too fast. They say the average young person is going to have 5 or 6 or 7 careers. All the people that were just studying whatever that is, how to work with digital stuff, and that was going to be their job. They just all lost their job because AI is going to replace all that. Everybody has to start over again. That's the world we're in.
Wow.
But the benefit is when these other avenues, remember, Peace, you and I are old enough to remember someone would study and go to school, or they would get an apprenticeship, they would get a job and do it their whole life. That doesn't happen much anymore.
No.
Everything's changing so fast.
Yeah.
So then, where do we get stability, centering, and aim from? It has to be inside. And we have to remember the old stories that said that inside everyone is this genius combination that is set up for a calling that awakens the psyche, spirit, and soul, that leads to a life of meaning and a potential destiny. Mention one other thing. The Greek term for genius is daimon, daimon, daimon. And so it's a very similar idea that everybody has this unique daimon or inner spirit. But when we don't live the daimon, it becomes a demon. The unlived inner spirit changes from spiritual guidance to demonic entrapment. It's not, there's no neutral. To be alive is to either be expanding the inner life of the soul and the spirit, or to be diminishing and becoming less alive, less courageous, feeling less meaningful, and feeling more trapped.
The Hindus developed a system called the Yugas. I'm sure you're familiar with the basics of it. And right now, apparently, we're in Kali Yuga, the darkest period. Is this calling some of the, is it focusing on the next phase and helping us come out of this dark period?
Well, big heavy stuff, the yugas and all. I forget how long a yuga is. It's ridiculously long.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
Yeah. So one way to look at that is it's so big that counting doesn't matter too much. The other way is to see it is that we're in the darkness for quite a while. And this is rough for people that have been brought up to think that democratic elections can change everything. We now know that we can't even trust the elections. The,
Yeah.
the institutions, that we're in this period of darkness, which includes the collapse of institutions. And so the things that used to protect us now are turned against us. And so I go to these really old ideas. Like, for instance, one of the old descriptions for the human soul was the light found in darkness.
Hmm.
So when we're in the dark ages, we have to find the light inside our own darkness. One of the great things that happened in the Western world is in our lifetime is ideas and practices from the Eastern world came to the West. In the Eastern world, they've always thought one yuga leads to the next yuga. It's in a cycle.
Right.
In the Western world, they think it begins with time and then the end of time comes.
Right.
It's a very limited idea in the West. But when you bring in the Eastern idea, you get this expansive sense of cycles. But the big cycle is not the one that we have to understand necessarily. The cycle inside ourselves becomes the thing. How do we find light inside our own darkness? When the outside world doesn't provide, pathways that make sense, or the guidance that we need, or the sense of a center that makes meaning out of everything, then we have to fall back on ourselves. And the Eastern world was all about that. In the Eastern world, they said what we go out in the world looking for already exists inside us. And
Mm.
that's the same thing was found in the West in the idea of the inner genius. What we're looking for is inside, but we have to go outside into the world in order to encounter the kind of difficulties that break the kind of spell of the ego down so that we can really fall deeper into ourselves and realize that what we're looking for is inside. And so I think in the Kali Yuga, the idea was, in, as I recall from the Vedas, that in the Kali Yuga, even the spiritual practices don't work as well. And so
Yeah.
they say in the Kali Yuga, you have to go deep inside. So there's a story from the Vedas where there's this king, who in this case happens to be a philosopher as well as a ruler. We don't necessarily have that in the modern leadership, but anyway. And so the king was so interested in philosophical ideas and genuine learning and, oh my God, truth, that he would have this spiritual kind of guru come and talk to him on a regular basis. So part of the week of the ruler would be visiting visits from the guru, and he would ask him the kind of questions that you encounter and find within yourselves when you're struggling to learn and grow. And so one day the ruler says to the guru, "So if the sun were to go out, where would the people find the light that gave them the courage to go out and do their work in the world?" And the guru said, well, they would get it from the moon. And so then the ruler said, but what if the moon failed to appear? And then the guru said, well, they would get it from the stars. And then the ruler, who's not giving up on his proposition, says, and what if the stars failed to come out? And then the guru said, then they would turn inside and they would find the light in their own deep self. And they would go out into the world with the courage of that light.
Wow.
That's a 5,000-year-old recipe for what we have to do now. The lights are failing. The things
Mm.
that we saw as guiding lights right now in America, the idea of democracy is wildly under attack. And democracy depends upon the individual human souls. And so that's where we have to find it. And then we have to go against things that we were taught in the sense of realizing what we're looking for is inside. And there is a Western version of that. The Greeks called it the daimon. The Romans called it the genius. We have that in our own Western kind of tradition. And now's the time that we need it. So I went from being awakened as a storyteller by the threat of a gang to working with armed gangs in Chicago and LA and various places. And after I was working in south side of Chicago, working with street gangs, and they love stories. And so I would come back every couple of months and tell them stories. And then I would come back after a couple of months and they'd say, so and so, yeah, he died. So and so, oh, she killed herself. You know, that one,
Yeah.
is in jail. And it was just breaking my heart. These are 15, 16-year-old kids. And I started to have that despair of what does it matter what I say? You know, and and I told them that. I said, I feel like overwhelmed by the tragic loss of your young lives. And they said, no, no, no. We wait for you to come back and tell us stories. You can't stop. And so I realized that there was really that's what a calling is. You don't stop because it got hard. You don't stop because your heart was broken again. And so then I thought, how can I talk to them? Like I realized I'm talking to this young person. I come back a month or two later, they could be gone. What do I say to them in a very brief way that could be genuine, meaningful, and impactful? And I started to say, did you know you're a genius? And they would go, what? The word genius is well known in Western culture. And so saying it means something. So they say, what do you mean I'm a genius? And I would say, well, I've known you for a little while and I see the way you behave. You got this kind of genius. That's how it looks to me. And they
Mm.
say, well, what does it matter? And I said, well, that genius could take you out of this situation you're in. It's bigger than the situation. In a way, it's bigger than you, bigger than you think you are. And the next thing they're all wanting to know about genius. And so that's what got me realizing that same message has to go to people who are more fortunate and less oppressed, because we need our genius capacities in order to change the world, but also in order to heal it.
It sounds like, though, when the soul is recognized and you are working to follow the calling, things kind of not only fall into place, but there are high and low periods that you encounter. How do we work around that? How do we stay in how do we lock in, I guess is the word.
So two things. One would be more of a philosophical, psychological thing, and the other thing has to do with practice. And so the first thing is the old two things, maybe two ways to say it. The old meaning of ambition was not to be driven to be better than others. The word ambit means to walk the circumference of the realm. So real ambition is to walk the entire circle of the psyche. And that turns out to mean the highs and the lows. In alchemy, they call it circulatio. And what they mean is throughout life, a person is going to go through almost predictable steps of getting higher in the sense of learning, in the sense of joyful experience, in the sense of awakening. But then there's going to be an alternative descent that's required also, where a person goes into the darkness and into the qualities of injury and woundedness and into the sense of despair in order to find their way eventually back up to the higher. So they would put the idea of the highs and lows into either the ambit of the psyche, learning the whole realm of the person,
Hmm.
or in the ups and downs that are part of expanding the soul. So despair, for instance, which means to lose all hope, despair, it's a French word. Hope is SPR, despérer, to be without SPR, hope. But the idea was when we lose all hope, it's not the end. Underneath the initial superficial experiences of hope, there's a deeper kind of hope. I call it the second level of hope, which is connected not to wishfulness, but it's connected to deep imagination. There's an old saying that a person doesn't know how to see the world until they've been in despair. In the darkness, like the king and the guru, the light we're looking for is down in the dark. And eventually we get more used to going down there. And it becomes a quicker movement down and then coming back up.
Hmm.
So that's one thing. The other thing is once we have a way to go, a path with heart, a genius path, a calling, there's so many names for it, we need to practice to sustain it. So I'm mentioning that with the youth in Chicago, the gang kids, and they're saying, you can't give up. We depend on you to come back and tell us stories. They were telling me I had to practice and I had to keep practicing it. I can't give up my practice because I'm now feeling injured or hurt or scared or sad. Those go into the practice. And so in order to, first problem is you don't have genius. The second problem, you haven't found your genius. The second problem is you found it. And now you have to figure out how to live with it. How do you integrate it? How do you find a way to give it that's meaningful? And how do you sustain it? And so I always wind up these days, besides saying there's paths, everyone has called to a path. That's an important old piece of knowledge. But a companion piece is to stay on the path, we all need a practice or practices.
A
And
practice.
then, so then we go back to ancient India, where they would say, well, there's two main roads of practice. And one is the path of contemplation, meditation,
Right.
looking inward and looking for a stillness and center inside. That's a great path, a really meaningful path. The opposite path is the path of expressive arts, the creative path of expression, the exact opposite, where a person is taking what's inside and pouring it out into the world. Often a person needs both paths, or you need to go back and forth, or you need to find your own combination. In other words, it isn't a binary choice. Most of us, like as a storyteller or whatever, mythologist, I find myself just finding ways to be quiet and sit with the images in a story. Because when I do that, they start to inform me. They start to literally give me ideas and understandings of what that aspect of life is about.
Hmm.
And so most meaningful pathways will include some kind of practice of contemplation and some kind of practice of expression. And in ancient India, they would have on altars or shrines, they would have both elements there. So first we have to find the genius, get some sense of the calling, find the courage and take the risks to step into the world, not as what everyone else thought we were, but as what our soul knows we are. And then in order to sustain that, find practices that support it and give us places of refuge, but also sources of renewal.
As we conclude, Michael, what does a society look like with large population of people who are following their calling? I'm just curious. Do you have a thought for that? Or can you recommend a period of time where it looks like there was a majority of people that were following the calling?
I think it's always been a mixed bag. It's always been some of the people just think, hey, this is about 9 to 5, or this is, just this, that, and the next thing, and you're
Yeah,
lucky if you can retire and all that kind of stuff. And
right,
there's been the other people going, are you kidding? You know, I wouldn't even be here except I just love music so much, or every time I hear the sound of an animal being wounded, I'm going to go there and help them. And those people, it's not always been that everybody got it. And apparently, it's not always been that everybody had to get it for it to be meaningful. In other words, the culture changes when a proportion of people awaken to things that are meaningful and begin to live it out. What that proportion is, I don't know, but it's definitely less than 50%. It might be way less. Because the people that are living day to day using conventional ideas are really riding on the ideas and experiences of other people. When the ideas and experiences of other people rise to a greater height and descend to deeper levels of understanding, the everyday people are pulled into a greater light by those that are already living it. Think of the Renaissance.
right.
So I think that's how it works. And
Mm.
so I think that the way I'm imagining it now, we are in such desperate straits because of this thing of climate crisis and cultural crisis happening at the same time. It means that every calling is meaningful. And it means that if enough people did awaken in ways that just have to do with their own naturally endowed gifts and naturally ways of entering the world and being meaningful, then that shifts it for everybody. And so the old idea that might have started with that is the human soul wants to transform. It wants to expand and grow throughout the life. We're not supposed to be similar at the end to the way we were at the beginning. We're supposed to be this awakened version of ourselves that brings out things that already exist inside that turn out to be meaningful, not just for us, but also for other people. And so when that happens, then what if someone like, I'm a storyteller, mythologist kind of guy. I'm not running for office. I'm not going to run for office. I can't operate within the limitations of a political structure. I
Right.
have to have the freedom of imagination. But yet there's someone else right down the road who is called to act out not just being an official, but being a statesman or a stateswoman. So what happens when the callings start to happen is people are going in ways that are meaningful. Younger people or other people are watching someone do something meaningful, and if they're really compelled by it, it usually means their calling is similar. And so the next thing you get natural education, which is mentoring, where a person gravitates towards someone who's further down the road that their soul wants to go on. And the next thing you have people being pulled along by other people. And we're in a state now where every gift is meaningful because the wounds are in all parts of nature and culture.
Wow, amazing. Michael, wonderful. Great to have you on the program. How can people learn more about your work? Give us your website and your I think your YouTube channel is has a name. I can't remember. It's not Michael Meade, it's something else.
I don't know either, but so we have a podcast called Living Myth, where every week there's a free podcast, and I usually use it to look at modern circumstances through the lens of myth. So there's that, and it's free every week. And you can just find that, Google Living Myth. The website is Mosaic Voices, all lowercase, all one word, .org.
Mosaic
And there you
Voices. Yeah.
yeah, and there you can find free essays and recordings and books and all kinds of things that are on the website. And then the YouTube, I think, is also, is it Mosaic, mosaicvoices.org is also the YouTube name. And we're increasingly putting on stuff on YouTube, primarily because it is now the greatest platform for education of young people.
Right. Before we started, I mentioned your teaching or lecturing or storytelling. Are you doing that primarily through your YouTube channel or are you doing that live? Can people see you at your
Yeah,
locations?
we do. It's on all on the website. We do live online events,
Okay, great.
and many of them are free. You can just cut me, they play all over the world. People come on for free, and then some of them are, more detailed, and so you can pay a little bit to get to those. But the podcast is free every week, and there's many online free events as well. We're trying to
Fantastic.
get living myth out into the world as a kind of medicine.
Excellent. Fantastic. Real pleasure having you on the program, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you, and great to be with you, Cliff, and be well.